Welcome to Close Up Television. I'm your host, Jim Masters, and thanks so much for joining us. On this episode of our series, our featured spotlight guest is Eve Carson, author of the book Simple, Safe, and Secret, the 1981 murder of Joan L. Webster. Eve seeks to keep alive the memory of her sister-in-law, Joan Webster, a Harvard student who perished in November of 1981 under very suspicious circumstances. Despite being a cold case and meeting resistance at every turn, Eve continues to seek justice for Joan. She began researching this case back in 2006 because the former prosecutor announced that he was writing a book about this case. Having understood the case from the beginning, Eve understood that what he wrote was similar to what was promoted through the media. However, it did not match up with documents that she was able to recover. The case is well over 40 years old, and no one has been tried or charged with the crime. The state of Massachusetts alleged that Leonard Paradiso picked up Joan at Logan Airport, took her to a boat, murdered her, and then dumped her in Boston Harbor. Her body was missing until 1990 when her remains were discovered in a wooded area in Hamilton, Massachusetts, and not in Boston Harbor. This is a riveting, eye-opening, emotional, and gut-wrenching story. And it's truly my honor and pleasure to welcome author Eve Carson to the Close Up Television studios for this exclusive interview as she shares much more of the story and her book, which offers a more detailed account of the events, evidence, and people surrounding Joan Webster. She has dedicated the book to the memory of Joan. Eve, thank you so very much for joining us here at Close Up Television. It's an honor and a privilege to meet you.
Jim, thank you so much for having me out here and an opportunity to share my story. It's an extraordinary experience, and I hope people will really come to understand it.
It's an honor and a pleasure, as I said, and we did the radio shows, and I think that was it was a real trigger to want to dig deeper, because we had a limited amount of time to sort of get the story in there. But by having you come to the television studio, we have ample time to really dig in deep and talk about not only the story itself, which as said is really eye-opening and riveting, but also the passion that you have for figuring this all out. Take us back in time a little bit to the story of your sister-in-law, what she was like, and some of the events that happened that led up to your digging in deep and wanting to figure it all out.
Okay. Joan was 25 years old at the time, a Harvard graduate student, absolutely a bubbly personality. She was just a real sweetheart. Everyone loved her. Very bright student, very talented. She had a wonderful future ahead of her. At the time that she disappeared, she had gone home for Thanksgiving break in New Jersey. Ridden home with her sister Anne, and she had planned to have a guest come to visit her, kind of meet the parents type of guest. Things were getting somewhat serious, or at least in his mind they were, and that meeting got canceled. That visit got canceled, which to me was surprising. That's out of character for the Websters. Instead, she cut her Thanksgiving vacation short and actually traveled back by plane to Boston on Saturday night, November 28th, 1981. At that point, she had arrived at the airport. People had seen her. She had waved to a couple of friends, and then she disappeared. Just a gut-wrenching time. We didn't know it for 3 days, so it was really alarming. When we did find out, everyone was confused. What's happened to Joan? Where is she? It was winter. It was cold. And so for a long time, we had a lot of questions that we really couldn't answer. My role in all of that, I was married to her brother, the only non-blood relative who was part of the immediate family. So things kept coming at me just like a gut punch. Where is she? I tend to be emotional. I got very emotional, obviously. But the family was very stoic. It was just a really excruciating time. It's not the kind of experience you would want anyone to have.
So usually when things like this happen, there's investigations, they dig in, they try to get the facts, the information, the timeline of events and all, and then they come up with a summary. Okay, this is what we think happened. And then case closed, and we move on to the next case. For you, what their summarizations were just didn't click right. You didn't feel satisfied with the information that those who did the investigations had presented, right? It just didn't seem right. Something was missing for you?
We're all conditioned to trust authorities. They're there to help us when tragedies like this happen. They came up with a theory. They tried to tie this case to another case that was still unsolved in Boston. So actually the case became very sensationalized. It was publicized heavily. Now, they didn't have cable TV back then. They didn't have cameras everywhere. People didn't have cell phones. So what you got was, there was a lot of media attention, but as the story kept going, it seemed to get more and more sensational. The authorities claimed that this man, a man by the name of Leonard Paradiso, had picked Joan up at the airport, driving a gypsy cab, took her to his boat, hit her on the head with a whiskey bottle, raped her, murdered her, and then dumped her in Boston Harbor. For a long time, I didn't have any reason to doubt the people that were telling me this, not only the authorities, but also the family. And when her remains were found, ultimately in 1990, they were buried more than 30 miles away.
In a known mob area as
well? It
well?
was a known mob area. There was criminal activity. It's a very remote area.
Hamilton.
And I have been out there. It's hard to find. You would have to know the area to get back in there. And it just didn't make sense. Well, why would he murder her on his boat and then drive her all this way and bury her there? At that point, I became skeptical, but to raise questions with the family, they didn't want to hear it. There were even authorities that raised questions with the family that said, I don't think this is what happened. I began to dig into the case when the family went to the former prosecutor who was pursuing this suspect, and he decided to write a book about it. It's called The Paradiso Files, and he claims in there still that she was murdered on a boat, and he kind of twists the story because they had to. The facts were her remains were found in Hamilton, Massachusetts. It just was a really extraordinary, it was just like, it just doesn't make sense.
So when you felt you weren't satisfied with their summarization, their wrap-up, their investigation, did you take this on by yourself, or was your husband around at the time, his family, other people that were like, okay, Eve, we're with you, we're supportive of you, let's try to figure this out because we lost our loved one and maybe the numbers don't add up? Or did you find that you were on your own?
I was on my own. You don't disagree with the Websters. They're very controlling. I learned that over the years. There were things that I know now, having had many years' experience with the Websters, that I didn't understand earlier in my relationship and my marriage to Joan's brother. We were married for 25 years, and it was as the experiences piled up that I had more and more concern as far as what they were telling me. They were settled. They decided, they turned down broadcasts and programs that explored, missing person and cold cases, and refused to do them. And it was like, why would you do that? What I found as I started to dig into records and reached out to the local district attorney who has control of this case, I was floored. There were things in there that I was never told, or I was not told the truth. And that just spurred me on even more. For example, one of the reports that I did get back from the current custodian was It was an eyewitness description. The story had been for all these years that she was never seen. Well, she was. An eyewitness gave a description of the man that was with Joan when she disappeared from the airport. The description of the man is completely different than the man that they went after and ultimately accused. Now, he was never charged or tried for the crime, but he was accused. And tying it to the other case, they just felt like they were, wiping out this serial killer. Well, it wasn't that case at all. That, I believe, was a wrongful conviction, and I do have people looking at that right now. And as far as Joan's case, it just didn't make sense. She was not buried where she was supposedly dumped. And as I explored even further, I found out that the crime scene didn't exist. It was claimed she was murdered on this boat, but the boat was sunk more than 4 months before she disappeared. And I have certified court records that specify that with evidence. And the former prosecutor who wrote his book with the family's support gives false information all the way through.
Now, you would figure that with this information, with you as the caring sister-in-law, that others involved or others that are connected to Joan, whoever they are, would say, wow, this is revealing. Maybe it isn't what we thought it was. Thank you so much for taking the time to dig in, and you've got this incredible information. Maybe we should reopen everything and re-explore it, open up the case and give it another deeper look. Was that the case or not really?
Not really.
Why do you think that is?
Because what it really does show is malfeasance on the part of authorities who were involved in the initial investigation. One of the things that I learned as I went through all of this was that there are 2 police officers who were involved in the investigation who actually knew the correct cause of death with correct detail more than 7 years before Joan disappeared. So basically you've got authorities who fabricated a story, pushed it for years, tied it to other things, and piled on a suspect, and then we're going to maintain it no matter what. The story got more and more sensational over time. They just kept adding things to the point where it really seemed absurd. And it is. Obviously, the boat doesn't exist. That crime didn't happen. I've provided those court records to the current Essex County District Attorney's Office, and they completely ignore them. And they even stated to me, they know the former prosecutor, Tim Burke. They do not want to focus on him, and it's because it would expose malfeasance and a great deal of embarrassment.
Taking on something like this single-handedly is something daunting. And of course, there's risk involved. Have there been any reservations about continuing the digging, continuing working at this, trying to figure this out, or you're just gung-ho about it?
I was asked by a man by the name of John Dolly, who was the first assistant district attorney in Essex County. He was truly at that time the individual responsible for what happened in this case. And he asked me if I thought that my daughters were at risk from the Websters. And I said yes. If family secrets were to come to light, they were. And basically I considered it a warning. He told me that secrets would only come out if I brought them out, and that, gosh, then he'd have to dig into it and investigate it and look into it. But he doesn't stop to realize that if you've got a family that's not telling the truth about a murder investigation, that puts people around them. It makes them vulnerable, it puts them at risk. And to what level the Websters were involved with Joan's murder, I don't know.
How long have you been doing this research, doing the investigations, digging deep? How long has it been?
Almost 20 years
of this time.
Mm-hmm.
Wow, That's
and
incredible.
recovered records from just a wide variety of sources. When I first started to dig into the case, I didn't realize just how extensive this was. I have identified 26 different offices or agencies, departments who touched this case at some point, not only state and local, but also federal. And records were never consolidated. There was not one repository for everything. So I'd get a piece of information from here, a piece of information from there, and slowly had to put the puzzle together. I literally made a spreadsheet. Who knew what, when, names, dates, times, to really kind of pull it together.
How did this not become, or maybe it has, overwhelming and consuming for you, where it maybe stops your own life because you're consumed by getting this information? Tell us about that, dealing with that.
You know, it's emotional to go through this, and it's emotional to relive it, going through it. But the more and more I've gone through it, the more frightened I become. I was lied to about what was going on, about a murdered member of my family. That's frightening. You know, why would these people lie to me? You know, when you go through something like this, in order to cope, you really have to have as best information as possible. And for people to lie to families that are traumatized, loved ones that are traumatized, it does tear families apart. My daughters, I'm certain, are not happy about me digging into it. It pits, you know, one set of facts against what the family has told them, and the family's told them what they've told me, which was not true.
And they worry about you going through this. And
I suspect there's a lot of fear on their part for what could happen to them, or embarrassing circumstances coming out in regards to their own safety and well-being. They've been lied to, as I was. And that's what keeps me going. Is it all consuming? No. I work. I'm productive. You know, I have things that I like to, you know, participate in for my own enjoyment and relaxation. There are times I really have to take a break. But it is important for people to understand a case like this. It doesn't just impact the person they wrongfully accused. It sets up a domino effect. I learned of one woman whose property the remains were found on. She ultimately had a nervous breakdown and lost her veterinary practice. I mean, this has impacted people all along the way. And I'm very concerned that it has impacted my children as well. I can't bring Joan back, but I can shine a light on the injustice of and what people in positions of authority can actually do and how many lives that affects.
would you say that you've always been a curious person?
Yeah.
Always want the facts, didn't always take things, you know, at face value right away. You needed to know a little bit more. You needed confirmation. So early on, maybe even as a kid, you were curious, you were digging. So this is an expression of that as well, right?
Yeah. I'm a very headstrong person. I think for myself, even though the Websters, I considered them really rather controlling. I think for myself, many times I would look at George Webster, Joan's father, when he would say something, and I would go, George, people have different life experience. They're going to have different perspectives. It's not just the way you think it is. And but you know, that I learned to brush it off to a degree at that time, but have come to understand just how serious that is.
Now there's the digging and the investigations and finding the facts that you have found, and then there's the next level, which is sharing that with the public, sharing that with the world, and writing a book about these tales. And you've done that with this, Simple, Safe, and Secret, the 1981 Murder of Joan L. Webster. And here it is here. When did you decide, I want to write a book, I want to share this with the world? Maybe were there hopes that if there were other folks that were going through things similar, here's how you were able to sort of, you know, dig, find facts, deal with the situation, and of course honor the memory of Joan as well. Tell us about the title and tell us about the book and what this was all about.
The book, when I first started writing, and I've written several things. There are articles out there and things that I've written. But I first started writing at the encouragement of an abuse advocate who said, write out the experiences that you've had to try to make sense of them, because there were things that were going on that made no sense to me. I ultimately decided to put it in a book to, as clearly as possible, explain to people what happened in this case, how it got entangled with another case, and the steps I took, as you said, learning, just by the seat of my pants, how to go out and request documents and information, finding out the legal ins and outs of what I can and cannot do and whatnot. So there's a lot of information there with that. As far as the title, Simple, Safe, and Secret, that actually comes from a document that I found when I was doing research on the case, and I researched every aspect. I researched the family. I researched the family's background. I researched Boston and Boston's history. The document that I found was an assassination manual, training manual. And it literally describes the methods of assassinating someone. And a lot of the components in it actually match up with the facts that are known in Joan's murder. Simple refers to the victim. The victim was unaware that they were in danger. Safe refers to the culprit. The culprit was not ever found. No one was ever tried, even though a man was accused. Secret means that the motive behind the killing was not known to the public. Now, when I was looking for what's the manner of how Jones was murdered, what was the modus operandi, and it was mind-boggling. Items were distributed all over the place. They weren't all in one place, much as the documents weren't. No one has identified what the murder weapon was. She could have been hit with a bat or a tire iron or a limb from a tree. She was not found for a long time. The media took off on this case and it became tabloid, a trial by tabloid, really. Simple, Safe, and Secret happened to have been the training manual that was taught in the CIA during the time that George and Eleanor Webster, Joan's parents, were involved in the CIA. So that's where that title comes from. I want to tie it into what their mindset is. These were very secretive people. It explains a lot why they weren't straightforward and honest with me during this investigation, but it also covers topics. I mean, this was a very well-planned murder. It was very well orchestrated.
Any thought to why? Was there money involved, or was there...
When you look at a murder case, the first question everyone asks is, what's the motive? I'll go to intent first. There are two things. There's motive and there's intent. Intent on the part of the authorities, intent on the part of the Websters is very easy to identify. They did not want people to know what really happened to Joan. That's the intent.
Was she dating somebody at the time? Were you involved in a romantic relationship of any kind? Or?
She was going to have a visitor in New Jersey over Thanksgiving break. That visit got canceled. I do mention him in the book. Yeah. His name was Keith. He's a very prominent person today. He's a name that a lot of people would recognize.
Contact with him?
I do, yeah.
And he is in agreement with you that something is awry?
We don't talk about the case a lot. This man was a fraternity brother of my brother's in undergrad years. Oh. He met Joan at Harvard when he was there in business school. he was going to be out there over that Thanksgiving weekend. So that to me was clue number one. They don't typically change their plans, but it did. It got changed. Is there curiosity? I'm sure there is. Everyone was just, it was like being punched in the gut when Joan disappeared. No one could figure it out. It was very easy for people to just explain it away that this was a random act. Leonard Paradiso, this known person who's got a rap sheet, he picked her up. He's a serial killer, according to the former prosecutor. I couldn't find evidence that he ever murdered anyone, including the person that he was convicted for her murder in 1984. The pieces didn't fit. So Joan was just so beloved by so many people. Yes, I have people that reach out to me, people that are very happy that I have dug into this case. The people who are not happy are the authorities and the Websters.
What are the current authorities doing now, all these years later?
They don't do much, but I will mention one person's name. His name is David O'Sullivan. He's an assistant DA in Essex County, Massachusetts. He's the assistant DA, and I met with him in person. He's responsible for records requests, if people request records. They hide behind a shield that this is an open case. It's not been solved. So they say certain things are out of bounds, and certain things would be out of bounds. But there are some records that they have released, and there are some records that they could. Right now, he's in the violation of Massachusetts' own law on records. It's been appealed. He's just in complete defiance of providing records. And what I've asked for are records that they have that would support their theory that the boat existed. I've provided them with court records that said that boat did not exist. And it was even in the media at the time. There were news articles about the fact that this boat was missing.
How would you feel, Essex County, and how do you feel you've been treated by them through this?
Terribly. To my face, they say one thing. To my face, they acknowledge that I have, I know the case, I lived it, I know the case. They acknowledge that I have good records management. I provided them with a lot of documents.
I'm surprised that they don't hire you to work for them.
Yeah.
Has any of that ever happened? Have you had any opportunities where people are like, boy, she's good. She doesn't give up, give in. She's tenacious. She's doing this, out of the goodness of her heart. She's doing this on her time and her dime. And it's something that a lot of people would have just, okay, whatever, it's a no-win situation, and just left it, at the doorstep. Have people said to you, wow, you should go into, investigatory work?
I feel like I've earned a license or my law degree.
Yeah.
I've learned a lot.
Yeah.
Silence, for me, I live with conscience. Silence is complicity. And since I was the only person who was a non-blood relative in the immediate family during all of this, I have to face my maker one day. And without saying something, that silence is complicity as far as I'm concerned. But I also do it for another reason, and that is in protection of my daughters.
Yeah.
To circle back to what you asked about motive. For the there are 4 critical people who really should be looked at, or 5 technically. Tim Burke, who was the prosecutor at the time that pursued their suspect, Leonard Paradiso, and he was aggressive. He was obsessed with trying to prove this. 2 troopers, Andrew Palumbo and Carmen Tamero, who was Palumbo's superior. Those 2 officers knew the correct cause of death with correct detail 7 years before her body surfaced. And they funneled a story through a snitch, a jailhouse snitch. the jailhouse snitch repeated the story that Carmen Tamaro was actually the person that invented the boat story. And, you know, why would those two individuals know how Joan died and details about it? I mean, details to the point where they said it was on the right side of her head, a lot of blood gushing. She was struck on the right side of the head. It took out the whole right side of her head. It was a 2-inch by 4-inch hole. She would have died instantly. And then he's funneling this story through a jailhouse snitch, whom I've met face to face, very intimidating circumstance. The authorities out in Massachusetts, they've stifled me. I've gone to speak at 2 parole hearings for that snitch. They won't let me speak publicly. The current assistant district attorney who's in charge of records, David O'Sullivan, he actually put in a letter that this was a waste of time, needless and a waste of time and resources. Imagine being told that about a murdered member of your family. It's routine. Find out whether that boat existed. Did they make up this story? And then, therefore, the only thing I've asked them is to rebuke that story. You know, let the public know that this was not correct.
Do you, in these cases, go to the mayor, the governor, to federal authorities? Do you go above those initial people to try to figure this out?
I've taken steps to do that. I've hit a lot of obstacles. There aren't very many resources for people such as myself to go to. You know, if you follow the protocols that they have, going to the district attorney, going to the attorney general of the state. I have appealed to the mayor's, to the governor's office. They're not interested. They're just not interested, and there's not much you can do to force that situation other than be public. Speak out. Try to create a platform where people can actually hear the story of what's going on. And it is an important story for people to understand because this can happen to anybody. I mean, I was just a regular mom in the Midwest, and it's impacted my life in ways that I just can't even begin to explain.
What are some ways that it has?
Yeah. Well, it's caused real strain with my children. I will tell you that it also reveals that perhaps there are other crimes that people haven't found and haven't discovered or haven't tied into. You ask why I continue to pursue this. The other factor, aside from the former prosecutor's book, that triggered me to really dig into this case deeply was a letter that I found. Found a letter. It was written by one of my daughters, and it made allegations against her father. Now, they are allegations. I can't prove it one way or the other, but certainly frightening enough that I went and sought help.
So do you think that your husband was involved in things that might have led to his sister perishing?
One of the people that contacted me during all of this is a woman that I'd never met in Texas. She had been married to Joan and Steve's first cousin. He's a convicted sex offender, and he was convicted for abusing children. Those are similar to the allegations that were made against Joan's brother, and certainly frightening for me. There is corroborating evidence. There is contemporaneous evidence of the help that I sought, and I did provide that to the Essex County District Attorney. And that's what he's referring to when family secrets coming out. Well, then he'd have to investigate it. Well, that's something to be investigated. I personally, with my own personal knowledge and experience and understanding the behavior patterns now that I couldn't really recognize at the time, I'm not the only one that experienced them. So did the woman that had contacted me in Texas, who was married to Joan's first cousin. And there is a family pattern of behaviors. What she expressed was almost like listening to her tell my story. So those are things that Joan would have known. And this was a very image-conscious family. If secrets were to come out, they would have been disgraced, shamed, and yes, because of the way they are, as you know, they're just conscious of who they are and how they're presented. Everyone naturally, including myself, empathized with the Websters. What a horrible thing to go through. A missing child, never speaking to them again. No holidays, no weddings, everything that you think of that you share with family. Well, those are things that this family has tried to deprive me of with my children.
Do you feel there's been witness tampering, intimidation, and documents that still to this day have not been released?
Absolutely, absolutely. The case that they tied this to was a woman by the name of Marie Iannuzzi. When I went through those records, I was just astounded on the discrepancies that I found there. For example, there was an eyewitness that placed their suspect, Leonard Paradiso, more than half an hour away in an entirely different location. They just completely ignored the evidence that they had. They had evidence that absolutely pointed a finger at the woman's boyfriend. It was a crime of passion. They whitewashed it. It was disgusting to read what was going on during the trial on how the prosecutor, Tim Burke, was distorting the facts and just totally erasing what probably happened to that poor woman. So another life that was impacted. The documents, as I said, they were everywhere. They were in all different locations, trying to find them and put them together and piece them together. The final pieces of the puzzle sit with the current custodian in Essex County. They have records, but they were also missing a lot of records. And one thing that I did find out from a witness was that Tim Burke had left his office when he left the district attorney's office and went into practice on his own. He took a carton of Joan's files. And based on what I could read in his book, he had some of those records in those files. He quotes some of them almost word for word. Yeah, I was stunned when I first contacted the current custodian in Essex County, how many records they did not have.
There's also CIA ties?
Yeah, there are so many tentacles in this case. Joan's parents, George and Eleanor Webster, they met when they were both working for the CIA. So these are very intelligent people. That's why that manual for Simple, Safe, and Secret struck me so hard. This was the agency they were part of. Their culture was very secretive, and I learned over time that they were very secretive with me. That manual absolutely describes the methods that were used and part of, the Joan Webster murder, the fact that they used items that were just probably easily disposable or could be explained away. It wasn't a gun, wasn't a knife that you could track. She was probably hit with something that, you could just toss someplace and no one would think anything about it. The remote locations, the disbursement of items, the fact that a man met up with Joan at the airport and maneuvered her to a different car. That really unsettled me quite a bit when I learned that, because she had been seen. There was the composite, which is what I have on the cover of the book. That composite was never distributed anywhere. So the authorities and the Websters, who both had it, I have police reports that show that that was hand-delivered to the Websters. They wanted that hidden. It's numbing. But as I said, it's frightening
Are you angry?
Anger is, it's part of grief. It's a stage everyone goes through when you're going through grief. A circumstance like this, it's suspended grief. You kind of keep reliving things and going through the experience again. What did I miss? What do I need to know?
Because you've, in essence, in addition to the loss of Joan, there's other things you've lost as a result.
Absolutely.
So you're grieving several things simultaneously.
Absolutely. But anger gets you stuck. You know, you don't move anywhere.
You don't, right.
And as you mentioned earlier, I'm a very pragmatic person. I like facts. I'm kind of a science, math-based type person. I want facts. I want to be able to follow it.
Where's the beef?
Right, where's the beef? And, you know, it just, what didn't make sense to me, I had to figure out why. I wanted to know, were the Websters lied to? Were they lied for? Were they delusional? You know, what's the deal here? Delusional, I marked off right away because they're really smart people. Were they lied to? No. According to the records, they had this information. They had the source document of the eyewitness who described the man with Joan, and they ignored it. And they also were involved when the bankruptcy case about the boat, about the crime scene, they were writing letters to the U.S. attorney.
So is it, from your estimation, about saving face, saving the family name? And
everything is all about image for the
all of
Websters, unfortunately. And, you know, I say that very sadly. But on the other side of the coin, having been close to that, and my daughters are Websters, I'm scared. I'm scared. You know, there are a couple of instances that I had with Steve that had a sort of explanation at the time, but as I look back on them now through the lens that I have now, with knowledge that I've learned myself, I'm frightened about what he's capable of doing. And
Steve is?
Steve is Joan's brother, my ex-husband.
Right. There's contact with him or no?
There has been limited contact over time, not of late. They know how in-depth I've gone with this, and they know the information that I have now.
So even he has said, leave it alone?
He hasn't said leave it alone. He would like people to think that I'm off my rocker.
Okay.
The extortion incidents that I mentioned, there were at least 3. He was questioned about one of them because it was dramatic. It was a dramatic extortion incident. And I learned about it being part of the family. It was never reported in the papers and whatnot. So it's easy for him to say to someone who doesn't know, well, I don't know anything about that. She's crazy. She's delusional. I'm sitting here with the FBI reports and the police reports about the incident. It did take place.
Do you know who murdered Joan?
I don't know who actually struck her in the head. I have my suspicions, but I do know people who were involved, at least in the cover-up, and based on what they knew, they probably knew what happened to Joan. The 2 police officers, absolutely. You know, you're trying to tie him to cases that were strangulations or stabbings or these other things, and that's not what happened to Joan. And they come up with this completely different theory, and, you know, the only people who would know how Joan was murdered in those early stages was someone who was either involved or complicit in the crime.
With all of this investigation, do you suspect a specific motive?
The motive that I suspect, and the motive that, to me, that's the most important, is the motive for the Websters. As far as, you know, the officers that were involved, could have been money, notoriety, be a hotshot. There was a lot of corruption in Boston at that time. There were people that got involved in dirty business. And, you know, it could be any or a combination of all of those. The motive that concerns me is the motive for the Websters, because that involves my children. The motive for the Websters, knowing them as well as I do over a lot of years, is image. And image combined with the letter that I found, combined with another family member coming forward. She actually thanked me when she contacted me for exposing the family. They have a very strong public persona, very outgoing, they're entertaining.
Charismatic.
Yep, very charismatic, but they
Persuasive.
don't tell the truth. They don't tell the truth. And for a mother of 2 children who are blood relatives, that's extremely frightening.
I would imagine so. What do you see as next steps for you to help resolve or even expose this further? You've written the book. What other steps are you taking or do you see for the future of this?
I am in the process of setting up a foundation. It's called Victims of Injustice Speak, or Voice, because as I found, it's extremely difficult to find people who can help you. If someone is accused wrongfully or wrongfully convicted of a crime, as Leonard Paradiso was, there are groups out there, the Innocence Project. I haven't been accused of any crime. I haven't committed any crime. I've got no one other than the authorities to turn to. And if the authorities are only interested in keeping a lid on this and keeping it swept under the rug, you've got somebody to blame, so just go away and be okay with it. No, I'm sorry. And I'm not the only person who's gone through this. This impacted so many people. I know that in the Iannuzzi family, after speaking with someone that was close to members of that family, it tore them apart. One of the sisters actually lied on the stand. She changed her testimony. She was being threatened with never seeing her children again. Another witness was threatened with never seeing her children again, and said that the pressure was being put on them by the Massachusetts State Police, as well as the prosecutor, Tim Burke. Every time Tim Burke mentions my sister-in-law's name, he disrespects her, he devalues her. If you're going after someone, just making up a case and hitting the headlines, you have no value for who that person was. None. And I'm here to say so.
It's really amazing. Who was impacted when, from your perspective, the authorities put forth these false allegations?
Well, as I said, it does impact the person that's wrongly accused, but it impacts people that are close to them. They get stigmatized, and they have hard things that they have to deal with. But it also impacts, for example, the woman whose property it was found on. She had a nervous breakdown, lost her veterinary practice. It has impacted my children to the point where I do have concern for their safety, and I have concern about the allegations that were made in that letter. When I went forward to the prosecutor, these weren't just hearsay allegations I was making. It was in a written letter, and that letter was authenticated by a couple of family counselors that were involved. So, and I reached out to people who I thought could help. It may have prevented other crimes if they had legitimately looked at what happened to Joan.
Would you say that if there was any sort of a comparison that Joan's family is like the Kennedys?
I use that comparison in the book because Kennedys got away with a lot of stuff and the authorities would just sweep it under the rug. People would forget about it. Yeah, they had that kind of charm when they impacted and interrelated with people. People would just kind of follow along. I would also compare it to another case that people maybe are more familiar with in today's news cycles, and that's the Alex Murdaugh case. He was the lawyer in South Carolina, prominent family, money, well-connected, knew the ropes, knew the inner workings of how investigations go. He murdered his wife and his son. He got caught because he was lying. Well, here I've got a family that was lying, and it's not just my say-so. They are well documented through the media all through the years with this case. So I can go back specifically and say, this, you know, another thing that people don't know that they learned in the book is that George Webster was out of town that weekend. Everybody just assumed he was in New Jersey. I knew when we got the call that Joan was missing, I felt bad for Eleanor, Joan's mother, because I thought she's all alone. George isn't home yet. I can confirm that through news articles, that she did indeed confirm that George had been out of town. So where was he? Where was he? The description of the man that was with Joan, that individual had to know where Joan was going to be. Very few people did. Joan knew that individual. She turned to the cabbie and told him, this person's with me. The man got into a verbal exchange with the cabbie over a heavy suitcase. Well, that's kind of the demanding persona that George Webster displayed. But he also, she trusted him. He maneuvered her to a different car. And that's where she disappeared. So I can look at that composite. George Webster didn't have a beard. But I also know that that's something easily disguisable. I more look at the description of features.
Right.
The height, the weight, what he was actually wearing an overcoat. That's how George dressed. It fits George Webster, that description.
What was the writing process like for you in writing this book? I'm sure it had to be very overwhelming and emotional, cathartic, therapeutic, all these different things. What was that process like?
There were times I would break down and just sob. There were times that I couldn't get out of bed. When I saw the picture of Joan's skull for the first time, I couldn't get out of bed for 3 days. Gut-wrenching, and heard the description of how she was actually found. To sit down and write was very therapeutic. I just kind of went step by step to try and explain the lead up to when she disappeared. I tried to go into what they tried to tie it to, how the authorities were hanging this case on an individual, and the discrepancies that I found. I felt a good sense of relief in being able to express it and articulate it clearly enough, because boy, for a long time, when I tried to articulate the case before I had enough of the pieces, people would look at me and usually their eyes would roll when I got to the point where I said George and Eleanor had been in the CIA. It's a fact. You know, I can't change the facts. Like I said, I would really liken this to the Alex Murdaugh case of a prominent family. They had money, they had connections, and they got people that had other agendas who would go along with them and come up with a story to keep the heat off of their shoulders. Nobody could look in their closet, and they didn't.
Is this something that now the book is there, you've created the foundation, which is amazing as well. Are you satisfied with everything, or is this something that is ongoing for you?
Until I know with certainty that the explanation that was given has been rebuked, that it's false, such that my children hear that from authorized people or authorities to make that statement, they're going to continue to listen to the story that she was murdered on a boat. And, well, they didn't really dump her in Boston Harbor, even though that's what they promoted. They changed the story after they found her body. It's my children's safety that I am most concerned about. And through the foundation, I really hope that I can be a resource for other people. How do you go about digging out the records? How do you go about finding these things? Who do you need to talk to? What are the resources for someone such as myself? And I hope over time there are more and more resources. As I said, I'm not the only person who's been victimized, and I'm kind of a secondary victim. You know, I've gone through the issue of having a missing member of my family, but, you know, are my children victims of crimes? I don't know. There is a known convicted felon in the family. The behaviors are similar. I don't wish to air dirty laundry, but I'm also not going to be silent about things that, family secrets that deal with felonies.
So so it's clear for our viewing audience, your motives for doing this isn't to hurt people or attack people or any of that. It's finding the truth and justice and celebrating the life of Joan, who was taken far too early, and preserving her memory, celebrating again her life, but getting to the bottom of it. That's the heart and soul.
Absolutely.
It's not that you're here in a vindictive way, or I didn't like those people anyway, or any of this stuff. You just, because of the moral compass you go by, are directed by your own moral compass to want to celebrate, preserve her memory, tell the story that other people might be able to relate to with things that maybe they know in their own families, and get to the bottom of it, get to the truth. That's what drives you.
It has been.
In case anybody's confused, well, what's motivating her? What is she in it for? It's for truth and justice and celebrating Eve's life.
Absolutely. You know, it's a horrible experience to have a tragic loss in a family. That's just something I can't explain to anybody. But to find out what was explained to you wasn't even remotely the truth, that's frightening.
And disappointing in society and how the wheels turn.
The wheels turn for people who can turn them, or grease the wheels, as it were. And, you know, I'm looking for an inner peace. Inner peace comes with the truth. As I said, I've not asked the prosecutor to file charges and do this or that. The only thing I've asked for them is to rebuke what is false.
Right.
And, oh, well, we can't do that. No, I'm sorry, they can indeed do that, and authorities do it all the time.
Has it ever come close and then it got pulled back?
I met with the first assistant district attorney, John Dolly, and David O'Sullivan on May 1st, 2020, a face-to-face meeting, lengthy meeting. And they were kind of taken aback with how much information I actually had and the documents that I had. In their own records, they didn't even have Joan's death certificate. And I pointed out to them that this is an open case. You consider this still an open case. George Webster had Joan cremated. That's against the law in Massachusetts. If it's still an open case, obviously technology and things have advanced. There are things that perhaps could have given them the answers. They weren't looking. They just kind of case closed. And I'm like, that's just hurt way too many people, way too many people. And most importantly, now, at this point in time, my daughters. And I'm a mama bear.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you hope people are left with this book? What is the hope when people read this book? And like I say, gut-wrenching, riveting, eye-opening, emotional. It doesn't come easy writing a book like this, especially when it's so personal to you and to family. What do you hope they're left with when they read this book, Eve?
Anyone who actually knew the case, they're going to learn new things that the public did not know. But most importantly, if people really read it closely, they're going to understand how people in positions of authority, you put so much trust in them. They're there to help you. That's what their roles are, public servants. And if they've got a different agenda, I want people to see just exactly how it happened, and the things to look for when you do start to dig in and want to get truthful answers. I'll give you a good example. The foundational documents for Joan's case against Leonard Paradiso, their suspect, was a written statement by the jailhouse snitch and a transcript of an interview that was done with the Massachusetts State Police. Both very critical documents, and those were the foundation to go after Paradiso for Joan's murder. Both of those were sealed in the Marie Iannuzzi case, in an entirely different case. And I got them through another source, fortunately with the help of a private investigator, but the current custodian didn't even have them. Mm-hmm. And it details right in there that they did not know, their snitch did not know the cause of Joan's death. They didn't know. Mm-hmm. He gave the officers a multiple choice. That's why I know that those two officers knew the cause of death, and they gave correct detail. That tells me that would be the first place to start. You start with the person who made up the story to begin with, and how in hell did you know this?
What would you say to somebody who's watching right now, who is, riveted by what we're talking about here, and they're drawn into this conversation, they're going to get the book, which we encourage you to do, and they're going through something similar. They're not satisfied with what they've heard, they're not satisfied with what has been deduced, what the results, summarizations have been with something going on, but yet they don't think that they have the wherewithal or the tenacity you have or the strength to reopen and take another look or investigate it further. Or they feel their hands are tied, or they're just told, don't even bother, it is what it is. What would you say to somebody like that who is watching this right now, who might be inspired by you, the Midwestern mom, wanting to do what you've done?
The first thing I would say is trust your instincts. Don't let someone tell you what to think. Trust your own instincts. If something doesn't sit right with you, then that's something to follow. One thing I learned very early on is start to document absolutely everything. I learned that people were saying one thing to my face and another thing behind my back. So document everything. There are methods, each state is different, but there are methods of recovering records. Explore those options. As I found, there aren't too many resources from a legal standpoint that I've been able to tap into that would stand up against, Essex County District Attorney's Office like an Innocence Project would for someone who's had a wrongful conviction. But there are people out there who can kind of help you through the ropes. And I'm hoping through the foundation that we can develop more of that so that people have a place to go. And I would also encourage people, the book itself, I have a website listed there. It's a separate website. It's kind of set up like a blog so that people can actually see the timeline. They can see the documents that I refer to. They can see people's faces. I'm not ashamed to say anybody's name. These people were involved in this and still are. I've got no qualms. Don't be afraid. It takes a thick skin. People are going to come at you. I've had it. As I said, I've been threatened. I've been harassed. There are nights you have to silently cry, but you also have to have a support system. My blood family, I've got a brother and sister, they're rock solid. And their families, the attorney letter that I sent you was from a member of one of their families who's an attorney and really explored and really has dug in. People don't have to take my word for it that this is what happened. They can see the documents for themselves. So what I encourage, start to speak out. Don't be silent.
And you have not been, as you again do what you do to try to continue to get the facts, get the information, and also while at the same time, as I mentioned earlier, celebrating the life of this young lady who was
Joan,
a valued, cherished member of your family.
Something that I will not ever be able to prove because Joan is gone, but just looking back and reflecting over all the experiences I've had, the letter that I found, the fears that I have of what was really going on, is if Joan was going to... I was pregnant at the time that Joan disappeared. I lost that pregnancy that very night. Didn't know it for 2 or 3 days that those two things occurred on that same night. Yeah. So I've always felt kind of a special connection to Joan. But understanding now that if there were deep secrets in this family that would have impacted my future children, if Joan died for that reason, that's reason enough. Whether that's actually the case or not, I don't know. But if I carry that in my heart, that's a selfless person. I will follow her example.
Thanks so much for coming to the studio, Eve, to be so open and authentic and share this extraordinary story with us. It is absolutely amazing, and the years you've put in and continue to put in, and you've written about it in the book, and sharing it with all of us in such a real and, just open way, which isn't always the case all the time. We really appreciate you doing that.
I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Being a voice is not easy, but it's important. It's important. And each step I get closer, and I know that one day, that truth will be there.
And I can see in your eyes it's an emotional...
Yeah.
It's been many years of this journey.
Yep.
And a lot of hours, blood, sweat, and tears, toil, and all the things we talked about, and continues to be. Continued success, and hope you reach that peace that you desire for yourself and for your family.
Thank you so much.
What an extraordinary story of perseverance, resilience, determination, and love. If you'd like to learn more and get a copy of Eve Carson's book, Simple, Safe, and Secret, The 1981 Murder of Joan L. Webster, visit the websites you see listed on the screen. For all of us at Close Up Television and Radio, I'm Jim Masters. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you again next time.